welcome to Saturday Night at the Movies, the podcast that celebrates classic, cult, and current films and the people that made them, and many other aspects of pop culture. I'm your host, Steve Rubin. Our producer is Ben Shrewsbury, and our signature theme was composed by Greg Lehrhoff. Here it's always Saturday night, and our mission is to chronicle film and pop cultural history one memory at a time. If you want to decipher movie award season, you need to consult an awards analyst. And there is no better analyst in Hollywood today than Mr. Pete Hammond, who also serves as the chief film critic for Deadline Hollywood. Tonight, in light of the recent Academy Awards nomination announcement, Pete delves into the current film crop and gives us a good idea about the possible awards champions. Welcome, Pete.
Hi, how are you doing, Steve?
I'm good. I'm good. I have to say that I kind of lament the lack of good movies all year. And then when it comes around to the end of the year, all of a sudden some really good movies pop up
Yeah,
and we have award season and a it's like the Kentucky Derby. Everything is leading toward that wonderful run for the roses or whatever they run for in Kentucky. Um, I'm going to start out with the question, what was your favorite movie of the year?
oh God. I really liked Conclave, I have to
Oh,
say. And it got nominated, but they snubbed the director, Edward Berger, which shocked me. I was sure he'd get nominated this year, but I thought that movie was exceptionally well made, old style filmmaking, beautifully crafted in every way, acted, really good actors right down the line, a great story. It was
well,
good.
since we now have a video component through our YouTube channel, I can actually put up a picture of Ray
There you go.
Fiennes. By the way, I don't know if this was a typo, but it referred to him today in one of the blogs as Ray Fiennes.
Oh no.
What's the story on that? Is he no longer Rafe and now he's Ray, or is that just
As
whatever?
far as I know, he's Rafe. I haven't heard otherwise, and that they haven't told me I get it wrong when I pronounce his name. So unless I
Right.
say Ralph, then they would tell me. But Rafe is it. Yeah.
Well,
So
here in this movie, he's playing a potential Pope candidate,
yeah.
and I thought the movie was very intriguing. It's funny, the first time most of us saw Ray Fiennes, he was playing one of the most despicable characters in film history, a concentration camp commandant, a kind of a real sleazoid.
That's
And
exactly right. Yep.
and then of course he goes ahead and plays a really sympathetic character in The English Patient a few years later. I mean, he is one of our most eclectic actors.
Yeah, there's no question. He is a really he's a guy that goes for it. He's been nominated a couple of times for Oscars, English Patient, Schindler's, the movies you mentioned, and he's one of those actors that's really overdue. And this could be his year. It might not be though. There's a lot of competition, but he deserves it so much, and he's the anchor of this movie, Conclave. He was just
Oh
excellent.
yeah, and it's interesting. If you told me it's a movie about the selection of Pope, I'd say that doesn't sound very interesting. And yet the writer and director made it a very interesting movie with a lot of twists and turns.
Yes, exactly. It's almost like a pulp novel in some ways,
Right. And
but
I
with all the things that go on in it. Yeah.
and I know Isabella Rossellini got a nomination. I have to say this, and believe me, I've worked with Isabella. She's a sweetheart. She gets nominated for a film where she's literally on camera, it seems like for about 5 minutes.
Yeah, I think it's eight, something like that, maybe a little lower. So a lot of times she's on camera, she says nothing. So, but she has that key scene, and the audience applauded. When the first time I saw that movie, they applauded when she did her thing.
Well,
So,
I remember 1,000 years ago, the classic little film "1,001 Clowns" with Jason Robards. Martin Balsam had a part in there. Was probably only about 5 minutes and won the Oscar that year.
that's right. He was also a veteran actor who'd been around for so long. That's when they used to give Oscars to the veterans, and for a kind of career in some ways. They turn up with a good role. He had a nice role in that, but you're right, it's not a big role. And that's what supporting was supposed to be. Now they cram these leading roles into supporting. You know,
Well, it's
uh,
funny. Wasn't there a bit of a controversy a few years back when Meryl Streep, for The Devil Wears Prada, if I'm not mistaken, she was put up for Best Actress,
yes.
and they said that if she had gone for Best Supporting, she would have won that year.
Oh yeah. Definitely because she was the lead. It was all about her. She was the devil wearing Prada. So,
Right,
you can't get around that. There are certain things they can't get away with. Meryl Streep starred in that movie.
right.
So,
Yeah, you
there's
can't suddenly
no
shove her
way
into
around it.
supporting.
But sometimes you have two actors, like in the case of Emilia Perez, the leading contender for Oscars this year with 13 nominations. They didn't want them competing against each other. So Carla Sofia Gascon is in lead, and Zoe Saldana, who is actually the lead of this movie as well, if not the title character, went into support. And so she has a real advantage there because it's a huge role. And I don't know how poor Isabella Rossellini, with her like few minutes of screen time, is going to be able to compete with that.
Right, of course. Um, let's talk a little bit about the makeup of the Academy. There's been a lot of talk over the years that for decades the Academy was white, white, and more white, and then major efforts were made to diversify the Academy with enormous numbers of people. Well, I don't know if it's enormous, but certainly significant numbers of people were brought in across all diversity. Do you think the makeup of the academy has changed significantly enough to change the voting patterns?
I do, and I wrote an article today sort of predicting, well, I did yesterday in my Oscar predictions, saying I think because of the LA fires and the largest number of Academy voters are in the LA area, I think they were a little preoccupied this year and may not have voted. They extended the voting period because the Academy was well aware of it almost by a week, just short of that. And I predicted that the international bloc, those people farthest away from us here, would really figure into it this year because they have increasingly brought in this whole global footprint of people. And that is what happened. For the first time ever, you have two films nominated for Best International Film, which used to be called Foreign Film. Emilia Perez and I'm Still Here from Brazil. That was a big shocker to me in Best Picture. But both also nominated for Best Picture. You have Spain's Carla Sofia Gascon and Brazil's Fernanda Torres in the Best Actress race. It goes on and on and on here in terms of the international footprint here. There are three foreign directors who have done 10 of the Best Picture nominees. Jacques Audiard, Coralie Fargate, both of them French. Actually, there's more. Denis Villeneuve from Canada, French Canada, and one other one in terms of Walter Salles from Brazil. So this is huge. This never used to happen on this level here, and
Well,
we
here's a big question. I'll play a little counterpoint with you. If the Academy is trying to build its reputation and get bigger audiences for the awards, it doesn't sound like this necessarily helps the domestic TV ratings. What do you think?
Oh, I think you're right on that, Steve. You definitely got that one right. I don't think I'm Still Here is gonna a movie about Brazilian politics on its basic surface description is going to draw big audiences on ABC and Hulu this year.
Right.
But it's such a good film, and now with this international number, they don't outweigh the domestic voters. There's no question about that. But I do think this. Funny how Mother Nature can even enter into something like the Oscars, but this clearly affected it to the point where a lot of them, wait till the last minute to try to see the movies, and if they did that and their house burned down, that wasn't going to happen. And LA was just so preoccupied; they were afraid of They were even talking about not doing the Oscars this year, and every award show, everything that was lined up in January got moved, and the whole thing got thrown up in the air. So I think that affected the nominations here. Clearly, it's what I was expecting, and I'm not surprised.
Sure, sure.
Looks
Well,
like
as the people who listen to my podcast, not only this podcast, but the ones I do with Julian Schlossberg and Arthur Friedman, I do another podcast called Tales from Hollywoodland. I'm always advocating for more fun movies, audience movies, popcorn
yeah.
movies, for not necessarily the 20 something. I respect the superhero movies, and I know that they're a large part of the output of the studios these days, but I just like fun movies that I can just really enjoy. And I have to say, my favorite movie of the year is Wicked. I just
I How could I tell that, Steve? I I was going to make a wild guess, but
And I have to tell you,
I loved Wicked.
I was not a big fan of the play. I saw it
Oh,
up in
really?
San Francisco. I thought the production values were terrific. I thought Adina and Kristen did a great job in the lead roles. But I did not care for the songs that much, so I didn't really go out of the play singing. But my daughter, who was a teenager at that time, started to play the songs in her bedroom, and I heard them literally all the time. And
Oh,
I began
yeah.
to realize that I was hardly the target audience for Wicked. It was
Right.
teenage girls, and they went absolutely ape over this
Loved it.
play. And certainly, I would think that based on the success of Barbie last year, that young female audience, which had been starved for a long time, not have anything to see with their moms or even with their girlfriends, they cottoned onto Barbie enormously, made it one of the biggest hits of all time, and then I think that carried over with Wicked, it's same audience.
I agree. I think you're 100% right there. That's why it's a huge hit. It's a shame that it directed itself, uh, but that's
You
what
know,
happened.
here's another crazy thing, and I know that the Academy has its traditions, and but they expanded the Best Picture numbers
Yeah,
from
they
5 to 10 or more, whatever it is.
10.
Why they can't make it 10 directors?
It's
Hello?
always going to be five pictures that directed themselves. It's always going to be that. You're not going to get around it. And this year, one of them is Wicked, and did a great job directing itself. Also, John Chu, wonderful, but he has a shot next year for Wicked, the second part of
Yeah,
the.
with big shoes to fill, because I think that they they um they expended a large number of their songs in the
I
first
know.
movie, so I'm not
And
sure.
this movie stands alone, which was its genius. And I'll tell you, when I did my review of it for Deadline, I just called it Wicked because I knew that's what they wanted, but I put a photo, what they call a featured photo in it. It had a caption, Wicked Part One. Universal called me, I swear to God, within 45 seconds saying, could you tell your photo people to take off Part One? They only want this to be known as Wicked. And
You
that was
mean not
smart.
you mean not Wicked Cash Grab?
Yeah. Exactly. And of course, when you see the movie, it says Wicked Part One right at the
Right.
beginning and to be continued right at the end. But you're right. It seems to me that they've used their biggest stuff in this first one. So I don't know. I think Dorothy shows up in the second part and all
Well,
of the.
as I recall from the musical, she's barely in it, almost like a
Right.
background character.
Yeah.
This reminds me a little about what Peter Jackson did with The Hobbit. You know, The Hobbit was this tiny little book, and he turned in three 2.5 hour movies from a tiny little book, and they got progressively worse until the last one I could barely watch.
Yeah.
It's just franchise. It's the franchise vomit. That's all I
Yeah, well,
can
that's
talk
what
about.
we have with one of our other nominees this year, Dune Part Two.
Right.
I think Denis Villeneuve blew his chances, even though it got a Best Picture nomination and some tech stuff. I think he blew his chance when he said, "I'm going to do Dune Part Three." He's got a Part Three, so they can still wait. That worked with Lord of the Rings. They had Part One, which they also hid when they released Dune. It did not say Part One in their
Right.
market. and then Dune Part 2, and now he's promising Dune Part 3. So maybe that'll be the big payoff. Wow, he did all these three movies like Peter Jackson did with Lord of the Rings, and the Academy is so impressed they give it 11 Academy Awards all at once.
Right.
Uh, but that's possible here with Dune, but I don't think it has a shot at all this year because of that. And
Well, Timothy Chalamet certainly is developing into one of our more consistent performers.
yeah,
I have to say that I liked Dune too. I enjoyed it. It was big and certainly impressive. Um, but it wasn't the Timothy Chalamet role that I think got the attention this year. It's his playing Bob Dylan in a complete unknown. I thought that was a surprising, not surprising because the filmmaker Jim Mangold is a great filmmaker, but I thought that was a terrific film.
I did too. And he just nailed it. He knows that subject really well. It was cast to perfection with Ed Norton as Pete Seeger, and Monica Barbaro as Joan Baez, and of course Timothy as Bob Dylan, and they all nailed these roles, which are not easy. And the movie really worked. It was a very effective film. And as you say, Mangold's a really good filmmaker. I interviewed him for my Behind a Lens series on Deadline, and I pointed out he is the new Howard Hawks. He does all genres of movie,
Right, right. No, of course. I
if you
didn't
look at what he
I
does.
didn't notice I did excuse me, I didn't notice that did Ed Norton get a nod?
Yeah, he
He
did.
did, because he was wonderful.
Yeah, the three acting nods, and then we had picture director. Mangold's first nomination ever for director. He's
Oh
always
wow.
been snubbed for movies that directed themselves in the past, like Walk the Line and Ford versus Ferrari. But he did such a good job they couldn't resist
Well,
that.
certainly I would think, and again, you are the analyst. My instinct tells me that that A Complete Unknown has a shot for Best Picture, but I think it has severe competition from two other films. I think certainly Emilia Perez now didn't that get the most
Can't
nominations?
argue with 13 nominations, which
13
was
nominations.
three more than its closest competitors, which were Wicked, which didn't have directing and screenplay, which you kind of need, and it also The Brutalist, which got nominated in all the key categories, had 10 as well.
Well, let's
Uh,
talk a little bit about Emilia Perez. I mean, Zoe Saldana for me has always been a really fun actor to
yeah,
watch. I mean, I've been watching her since she was in that dance movie a million years ago, Center Stage.
yeah,
And of course, she does the big science fiction movies. She's in Guardians of the Galaxy. She's in Star Trek. She did a terrific
Avatar.
Avatar. Exactly. She's like the female equivalent of Chris Evans and the other Chris's. You know, she's an action star. What was your impression of the movie?
I saw it at the Cannes Film Festival when I didn't know what it was. I
Okay.
certainly didn't know it was a musical until I saw it. And it's really an extraordinary movie. It's unlike anything else, based on an operetta. They were going to do it as a stage thing. Then they decided, we can make a movie out of this. Very clever idea. Drug cartel leader wants to go undercover, change his gender. This is the greatest idea ever, and do it as a musical. And she, of course, is the lawyer he hires to sort of make that happen, or she, I should say. And it's the very first actor, Carla Sofia Gascon, who has ever been nominated, a trans performer ever been nominated for an Oscar. Somebody said, "Oh, Elliot Page was nominated a few years ago for Juno, and she was Ellen Page at the time, but she wasn't nominated knowing she was a trans person at that point.
Right. I don't even know
So
if I don't even know if she knew she was a trans person.
I don't think she knew then, but she knows now
She definitely
because she's
knows
now
now.
Elliot Page, and it's a little asterisk next to Carla Sofia Gascon, who is the first trans person after they became trans to be
Well,
nominated.
here's a question. Donald Trump is now president. There's a
No.
whole. It's true. I
What?
I don't want to believe it, but it is true. I'm wondering how the fact that a big conservative element has moved into American politics, how does that affect the Oscars, considering that California and the movie business and the TV business, entertainment in general, is not a big fan of the president. And I'm wondering, do you think that and this is a little bit of a wild theory, but do you think that nominating a movie like Emilia Perez for Best Picture and touting everybody an enormous support for the film is kind of a kickback at the president?
Um, I don't know. It might be. It is dealing with the trends, which is a big issue for them in the campaign, Republican campaign. They really did a number on that, and it was effective, obviously. And I do think it's unfair that we have that, and we're going to make it politicize it in such a way. I just reviewed a film today that's premiering today in Sundance, which is about humanizing a queer family, essentially, with Olivia Colman, John Lithgow,
Oh,
all these
what's
people in it. Yeah, it's called Jim Pa. He's the grandfather, and they call him Jim Pa.
oh,
But he's gay and left his family years ago, and Olivia Colman, that's her father, and then her daughter is a trans-binary teenager. And so she's caught in the middle of this and this family, and it's really humanizing it. So I don't know how that'll affect the sale of that movie because it's up for sale, Steve. So will the buyers be scared off by this, by what you're saying, that the town is going more conservative? I mean, my God, didn't Trump just name Sylvester Stallone, Mel Gibson, and John Voight as ambassadors to Hollywood?
well, I'm not going to call them the three wise men. Uh, it's so funny because I bump into John occasionally up at the deli at the top of Beverly Glen Canyon, and I've worked with John. I worked with him a million years ago on a really fun movie, which you may or may not have seen back in '84 called Desert Bloom.
I did see Desert Bloom.
Okay, so
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, Ellen Barkin, Jo Beth Williams, and young Annabeth Gish. And
Celebrating its 40th anniversary last year.
there
Yeah.
you go. There you go. Yes, that's a little scary. I was a Ute when I worked on that film.
Right.
But Voight is a character. He's definitely a character, and he still brings it to the table. It's funny because I wanted to get John on my podcast to talk about one of my favorite films of his, which he does not like,
Oh,
the Odessa File.
he doesn't like that?
He doesn't like the Odessa Files, so he won't talk about
Wow.
it. So then the other week, I had never seen Anaconda, where
Oh,
not only does he get to chew the scenery, but I think he bites into it three or four times.
yes.
And that's one movie he doesn't mind talking about. So
He
I'm
likes
hoping,
that. Huh?
yeah,
They're doing a new Anaconda
they're
movie. I
doing
can't wait.
another, gee, taking an old concept and remaking it. What a
Oh,
concept.
oh, there's a real concept. Yeah, no question about it. We were talking about Donald Trump, but I think here's the bigger picture of Trump land right now is Donald Trump got nominated for an Oscar today, in the form of Sebastian Stan playing the younger Trump in The Apprentice, a movie that Hollywood wouldn't touch after it premiered at the Cannes Film Festival. They were all afraid of it. Tom Ortenberg's Briarcliff finally picked it up because Tom is brave in that way and likes political movies and things. And this movie really wasn't that political. If Trump saw it, I think he'd find that it's not bad at all. He'd probably like a lot of
Well,
it.
it's
And
funny.
also, Jeremy Strong got nominated playing his evil mentor, Roy Cohn. So no one expected Academy Award nominations for that movie, and I'm so happy it happened. And maybe
Oh,
it'll be interesting to see how Trump takes on the Oscars, knowing he's part of it directly this year.
Oh yeah. Well, Billy Rebeck, my writing partner on the comedies I've been writing, he was telling me about Jeremy Strong's performance for a while, and then he told me that Sebastian Stan actually makes you feel sympathetic
That's what
for
I mean.
Trump.
If Trump saw this movie, except for the rape sequence with his wife, and the sequence he's really going to hate, the liposuction and the hair replacements. He won't like that at all. But the rest of it, He might find, yeah, that's me. And his fans, little base that love him, would probably like this portrayal of him.
So here's a question. I saw Blitz a couple of months ago,
Yeah,
and I was very impressed with the production values. I mean, Steve McQueen has become one of our really terrific filmmakers.
yeah.
What do you think happened with Blitz, Pete? Because
It's
for a
funny. I was thinking about it today. It suddenly occurred to me, Blitz didn't get anything. Not even production design, not even costumes, not the kinds of things that a production on that scale would normally figure in, at the very least. I don't know what happened with that movie. Before it opened, people were kind of downplaying it. Some people had seen it and they were negative on it, and it got off to a bad start.
is is
Apple,
is her name pronounced Saoirse?
oh, Saoirse Ronan,
Saoirse
yes.
Ronan. I mean, she's a terrific actress. For those of you guys who haven't seen Blitz, it's basically an historical drama about a mother and son living in London during the London Blitz of 1942, and it's a very harrowing story of them getting separated and trying to find each other. And the again with the special effects, it wasn't even nominated for special effects, and the visuals were
No, not
literally
even on a
stunning.
short list for that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
it's a shame. And I know Steve was really excited to do this film. It meant a lot to him. I know you would be, being the master of all things war and World War II.
got to watch it absolutely. And
It reminded me of, obviously, of Hope and Glory in some ways, but it was its own thing, and I thought he did a good job, just as a craft of filmmaking here. Uh,
well, the movie for me that was a surprise was Anora.
Yeah, well, that was great. I saw that in Cannes. I loved that movie, and it won the Palme d'Or in Cannes. It was a different kind of movie to win, an American picture here from Sean Baker, who's only done indie movies before and basically specializes in stuff about sex workers in most of his films. But
Right,
here,
right.
yeah,
I
here
re
he took it up another level.
I remember seeing Red Rocket and really enjoying it. Very kind of edgy material. So I'm watching Anora, and I'm looking at Mikey Madison, and I'm looking at Mikey Madison, and it finally dawned on me that Mikey Madison was one of the intruders into Leo DiCaprio's house at the end of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Oh, yes, that is absolutely right.
She gets, excuse the expression, a very warm reception.
Yes, I remember that very well. Yes, and she's in the Scream movies
So in
too,
the Scream movies, I mean, Mikey must be doing cartwheels now because here's a very good working actress who suddenly gets to the next level with an outrageous performance. It's not the same kind of thing exactly, but it reminded me a little bit of the approach Emma Stone took last year with Pretty Things.
right. Poor things,
Poor
yeah.
things, poor things.
Yes, she was great. Well, she's become a character actress. And Mikey, who, if you meet her in person, is very demure and quiet and reserved, and not at all like what you might expect of somebody that can play this movie. I told Sean Baker, the director, I said, I think you broke a record for the word fuck in somebody's mouth here. I mean, every other word
Oh,
was,
she's so funny, and obviously, I remember the previous record was probably held by Al Pacino in Scarface,
yeah.
which I think I watched on. I watched it on a local TV channel once, and it had more bleeps than I've ever seen in a movie,
Oh
or
my
more
God.
overdubs.
You
But
shouldn't even bother to try.
for those of you who haven't seen Anora, it's a very I won't say it's a necessarily a fun movie because it starts out kind of dark. She's a sex worker. She's a lap dancer at a New Jersey strip club, and she meets the son of an oligarch who falls for her. And the family of this young man is not very happy when he starts mingling with
Yeah.
Anora, and the consequences
Or
aren't
when
quite
she moves into his multi-million-dollar mansion funded
right,
by the parents off in Russia while
right.
he's having a hell of a time there in Florida. And it's got a great cast. It's nominated for the SAG Ensemble Award.
Right.
And to me, I love that award in these cases because it honors everybody. And there's so many great Russian actors in this movie that pop up. They're hilarious. I said when I saw this movie, I think this is a movie Billy Wilder would love, because it's edgy, it takes it to the next level. A lot of times he was trying to do this kind of thing.
You're reminding me of how wonderfully eclectic. We talked about James Mangold being very eclectic. Billy certainly was equally
Oh
eclectic, and
my God.
boy, do we
Yeah.
miss him. No, no, absolutely. I want to talk a little bit about a movie that I'm not sure I quite got. I do not have a picture, so I'm going to go to a generic. Um, Tell me what you thought of The Brutalist. Uh,
This is the Brutalist. Okay, the
The
picture you have on
Brutalist
here.
has a brutal running time of 3.5 hours. It took Elisa, my wife,
Okay.
and I 3 nights to finish it.
Oh my
I
goodness.
assume that it's probably a more enjoyable experience in one fell swoop in a theater. Where did you first see it?
I saw it at 9 in the morning at the Toronto Film Festival, and there was a line to get into this theater, which is in a building there. So you couldn't sneak in or anything. There was a line around the block, and I know it's not that big a theater, and I'm going like, oh, I'll never get in because I had to go to the end of the line. People were standing there, I understand, in the rain for an hour and a half before I got there. And by the mercy of a publicist, Steve, you know who they are. You were a publicist many years on movies and things, and I knew this one. She came out and found me in line and said, "Would you like to go see it? Would you like to get in?" I go, "Yeah, I'm not standing here in the rain because I don't want to get in." She said, "I'll be right back." She had to go get permission. And then she took me in quietly. And I got one of the last seats in this thing. So there was a real want to see. It had just come from Venice,
Right.
where it won the Best Director prize for Brady Corbet. And it's 3.5 hours, yes, with an intermission. The last time I've seen a movie with an intermission was Quentin Tarantino did it with The Hateful Eight,
Oh,
but you'd have to go back to the days of the road shows in the 60s and 70s
sure,
for
sure.
this kind of
They
thing.
actually, the composers would actually compose intermission music in
Yes,
the middle. I mean, those are the days.
those were the days indeed. Well, I thought the film, particularly in its first half, was really good. I said this is like an old style epic. It's fascinating to watch. The second half, after the intermission, it becomes quite a different movie and darker by far.
Darker, a little slower.
Yeah,
I,
I thought so too.
I have to say, and again, it's my own personal opinion, is I'm finding it difficult with really long movies. And it's not just a question of bladder control. I actually made it through Gladiator 2 this year, and that's about 2.5 hours without having to leave my
Right,
seat, which was a personal triumph. But I find that I wish movies were a little shorter. It's effect to almost every genre. As you know, I'm a big student of the James Bond movies.
yeah.
For No Time to Die to be almost 3 hours was absolutely insane. Bond movies should be under 2 hours.
Well, it was
And
insane for another reason too, Steve.
I'm
No,
sorry.
No Time to Die was insane for another reason.
Oh yeah, yeah. There were a number of reasons. It's interesting. Speaking of Bond, and I know this is a bit of a tangent, but when Amazon acquired MGM, they obviously acquired the James Bond franchise, at least one half of it, because the Broccoli still control the other. I think they wanted to really reap the harvest of
Oh
Bondom,
yeah,
like Disney has reaped the harvest with Star Wars. But I
yeah.
hear that there's a tremendous some enmity between the
They hate.
parties now.
They do not like Amazon, the Broccolis, who were just given the biggest prize for producers in Hollywood this year at the Governor's Awards, the Thalberg Award.
Right.
And they are very protective of this franchise. And as I alluded to, the insanity of No Time to Die has left them in a quandary of where do you go next with
Well,
the
I'll
Bond franchise?
I'll tell you definitely, it's not a money penny money penny spinoff.
Which maybe was on Amazon's wish list. I
Oh
don't
my
know.
God. I hope they
Uh,
get their act together because we need Bond movies because they're always fun.
we got to, they'll probably do an origin story or something, but
Right, right. The Bond will survive to get to a new Bond.
yeah, that's
Let's
for sure.
see if the
Speaking of Daniel Craig, though, he was pitched to get his very first Oscar nomination this year, playing a gay man in the 50s in Mexico, in Queer, Luca Guadagnino's highly sexually charged movie. And, when an actor does that, who's done what he's done in the past, although if you look at what Daniel Craig did pre-Bond, it's not a surprise to see him in these edgy kind of movies. He did one called Mother that was all sex all the time. But Queer was not well liked, and he didn't get nominated.
Well,
And
speaking of actors who didn't get nominated, and Billy called me today, he was really upset because he thought one of the performances of the year was Jamie Lee Curtis in The
I
Last
agree.
Showgirl.
I agree. I predicted she'd get nominated for that.
Right. They
She
said
got
she's
a
almost
BAFTA
un
nomination and a SAG nomination, and
they said she's Billy said she's almost unrecognizable in the role.
she is. She lives in Las Vegas, now a waitress, a former showgirl there. And her makeup job is like she's out in the sun 23 hours a day.
Ooh.
Just like it's just completely brown. It was off-putting at first when I saw it, but she steals every scene she's in, and she's got one remarkable scene in the middle of a casino. It's a great role. She shot it in 4 days, and they love her too in the Academy. She's already won. But I was surprised, I have to say, that she got snubbed. I just don't think they saw the movie in any great numbers.
Right, right. They didn't see Pam Anderson, and Pam Anderson was being touted. Do you think Pam Anderson deserved a Best Actress?
I would have, but this year was really tough for actresses.
Oh
There
yeah.
were so many of them, and the Fernanda Torres came in, won the Golden Globe, and got one of those slots. But you have a year where Nicole Kidman, Angelina Jolie, all of them were passed over here. Marianne Jean-Baptiste in Hard Truths was a tough movie to take, but she was superb. Um, there were so many you could go down the list, and there's only 5 slots. So
Right, right. It's
uh,
so funny. For years, being a big special effects junkie, I always marveled that with all of the special effects movies, for many years, they would only nominate three films. They didn't
right,
fill out the five. They finally have moved over and they got a five spot for the special effects awards. I think that I love the fact there are more Best Picture nominees. I think they've got to seriously think about more actors to nominate because it helps the industry. Nobody's
right.
going to say that they diluted the value of an Oscar. If somebody wins an Oscar in a field of five and then it extends to 10, it's still a big win. And yet
Yeah.
those other nine actors, their careers are boosted. It helps the industry. I really think the Academy has to start to realize that they've got to change at least for the ceremony, they need to change some of the rules so more people can get nominated.
Yeah, particularly in the director category too. And some award shows like the Indie Spirits and Gotham's and some critics groups have eliminated gender titles in the acting category. So they only have two acting categories now: best performance by a male performer and best supporting performance by performers. And they mix the two in both of them.
You're saying like a Timothy Chalamet would be going up against a
Fernanda Torres. Yeah,
wow, wow,
absolutely. And that's it. They just mix the genres there. And so what used to be best performance by a male supporting actor is now just best performance by a supporting performer. And the other is best by a lead. And what they do is they have been cheating on themselves though, because these groups are now, I've noticed, handing out 2 awards in each of these categories. So it's still 4 actors because they realize what are people tuning in for here? It's not to see,
well, that's just it.
the sound mixers.
Well,
Uh, Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that the Oscar broadcast, you and I were very similar. The Oscar broadcast every year was like a must sit, it was a holiday.
Oh yeah.
Oscar Day was a holiday, getting to see all the stars.
Yep.
And of course they got even more creative in the 90s with Billy Crystal. Those openings became classic openings.
Yeah. I hope
Um,
Conan O'Brien does that this year because when he hosted the Emmys, he had the best taped openings
Oh,
ever.
great, great.
Yeah.
Because I think that, I always say that you've got an opportunity to reach hundreds of millions of people. You got to get your A team in there. And occasionally there are bright lights of performance, even though it was kind of silly. I just love the fact that Ellen DeGeneres went into the audience one year with a vacuum cleaner and she's vacuuming up the thing. I thought it was just hysterical. And then there was
Yeah.
another, it may have been the same night where they were handing out snacks to some of the people who were getting hungry watching an episode. If you were asked to produce the Oscars tomorrow, what would you probably like to do that perhaps is not being done today?
Um, that's a good question. I go to a lot of these ceremonies where they do hand out the snacks and things for the audience there. I think the Oscars have become a little bit too dug in on their own tradition, and they can't get out of it. So any suggestion I would have to trim it, like when Bill Condon and Larry Mark produced the Oscars, they wanted to move the short films onto the red carpet before the show. And they'd still have a TV audience and that sort of thing, but they wouldn't have to do it and take up all this time on movies that people don't know and people that people don't know and all of that. And then you'd have more time to make it a show, like the Grammys. Because the Grammys have the advantage of musical performances that they can do, and they hand out very few awards. But it's an absolutely great show celebrating the best of the industry
Sure.
in a way that you want to watch. The Oscars, unfortunately, are, have to live or die on the movies that came out that year and their popularity that make people interested. Have they seen it? Last year was a great year because it had Barbie, it had Oppenheimer, it had that whole Barbenheimer thing going, had all of that. This year, I don't know if the Brutalist is going to bring them in, Steve. I don't know.
Or Emilia Perez. Yeah,
Yeah, Emilia Perez, a great movie, but it's on Netflix, and so it has a big wide audience there, and it's never. I don't even think it's made the top 10 on Netflix, even since it's been on there. So
no,
Netflix, they like Carry On,
I
and these
once
kind of
I once bumped into Gil Cates at a Directors Guild Awards, and I went up to him. I said, "Gil, you do the Oscars every year. Why do they have music numbers? It's about movies, and yet there are big music production numbers." And he said, "Steve, if it was up to me, I'd get rid of all the music numbers, but our international audiences love the music numbers."
wow. Well, this year they're getting rid of the music numbers.
Oh, I haven't heard that. Oh,
Yeah, they
really?
announced it yesterday because of the LA fires. They
Right.
feel like they want to honor the fire people. They want to do a different kind of show. And they, for the music category, for original song, instead of having performances, they're simply going to focus on the songwriter themselves, which is a big yawn to me. If you're going to do a film package and say this writer did this and this, that never works. It's a song. You want to hear the song. So I don't know, but they're not going to do it.
It's the other thing that's interesting. I find that the Golden Globes is always a fun party atmosphere because you combine film and television. You get 5 times as many celebrities at the Globes than you get at
Right.
the Oscars. The people who go to the Oscars, celebrities, are usually just the people who are nominated. There's not a
Yeah,
lot of motivation. It's like going to Sundance without a movie.
that's
Why would you do that?
that's right. Well, that is true. At the Globes, you also have TV. And so that audience is just like filtered with all kinds of visible people.
Sure, and they have drinking.
And there's drinking, yeah, with that moe they have on the tables. I go every year. I think it's a lot of fun.
Oh yeah.
There's so many people. There's so much more going on in the back of that room, though, because in the adjacent room there, they have the food set up and bars and stuff, and
Oh
it's just
sure.
so loud back there. You can't even hear the show.
Well, it's funny because I only went to the Oscars one year. I went in '87. I had been working for Will Vinton, who did those marvelous claymation
Oh
commercials,
yeah.
and Will couldn't go, so he handed me his seats. And so it was the year Platoon won, and Betty Davis had that horribly embarrassing moment on stage,
Oh, and
which
she
people remember.
presented to Paul Newman.
Yeah, but the thing was, I was sitting in the last row of the shrine, so literally I couldn't see much of anything. But they said, Steve, if you go to the Oscars, go down to the bar at some point because you'll see a lot of celebrities there. I
Yeah.
said, well, I'm not seeing much in the 99th row. I went down to the bar, and standing at the bar was Christopher Reeve.
Oh
And
wow.
that was a wonderful sighting. I said hi to him, and he couldn't have been nicer.
That's
Um,
cool.
well, listen, it's Oscar season. There are more movies to see than ever. The business seems like it's kind of in a slump, but when it comes to the Oscars, everybody starts getting excited about the movies that we have. I'm hoping that now that we're getting past strikes and COVID, hopefully we'll get past the fire season, that the movie business can get into high gear again and we can get a more eclectic slate of not just franchise movies.
That is my dream, Steve. They just want to remake or keep making the same movie over and over and over again if it's successful. And then you see a few of these movies that they make for their egos because they want to go to the Oscars, and they'll let one or two go through. And this list is full of those kinds of movies. We didn't even mention some of the animated films, which are fantastic this
Right.
year.
I hear the one to see is Flow.
Blow, it's brilliant, beyond brilliant. And it's also nominated for Best International Film, the very first nomination ever for Latvia. So,
Oh,
yeah,
very,
but
very, very
it's
cool.
a terrific movie. But so is Memoir of a Snail and Wallace and Gromit and The Wild Robot, Inside Out too. It's a great category.
Oh
Yeah,
no, I think animation is one category of movie generally that makes money every time out. It's one of those
yeah,
movies, if you make a good animated movie, you're going to make money because it's easy to dub in other languages and thus does very well internationally.
that's it.
We're actually trying to get one of our projects made. It's based on our children's book, which is out in the marketplace now. I've told you about The Cat Who Lived with Anne Frank.
Oh, yes,
Yes.
right.
So we have an animated feature. We're out there looking for the money right now. If you know anybody with 20 million to spare, just let me know.
Sure. Have you tried Elon Musk? I don't
Well,
know.
enough said. Well, this has been, Peter, you are one of the most enthusiastic people in Hollywood. I think you are a treasure. You're someone we need you on the front lines because you have fun with the movies and we have fun listening to you talk about the movies.
Oh, absolutely. And you too, Steve. You're on the front lines of everything. And
Thank you,
whatever
Pete.
happened to that Errand Boy remake? Speaking of remake.
Well, I was in typical Hollywood, I get the rights from Jerry Lewis, and then I'm considered baggage because the two lead producers were ready to develop it into a different kind of movie. They said, we're not going to do a movie about a goofball who disrupts a studio, which is what The Errand Boy was all about. We're going
Right,
to make him a young filmmaker who wants to get his movie made, an intelligent young filmmaker. And I said to them, guys, we just saw that movie last year. It's called The Big Picture with Kevin Bacon.
right.
And they completely ignored me, and that was that. But maybe someday. Uh,
Uh,
well, everybody, you have been watching and listening to Saturday Night at the Movies. Our guest tonight has been Pete Hammond. We love that you're listening and watching. Please, if you want to drop us a line and say nice things, give us a thumbs up. That's always appreciated. Join our podcast. It's free. Pete, thank you so much for being here. And,
Absolutely. Happy to do it.
and everybody, tune into our other podcast, Tales from Hollywoodland. Just check it out on Google. It's a good podcast as well. On behalf of all of us, I'm your host, Steve Rubin. Our producer is Ben Shrewsbury. Everybody, good night.